When Bob Quinn was a kid, a stranger at a county fair gave him a few kernels of an unusual grain. Little did he know that grain would change his life. Years later, after finishing a PhD in plant biochemistry and returning to his family's farm in Montana, Bob started experimenting with organic wheat. In the beginning, his concern wasn't health or the environment. He just wanted to make a decent living, and some chance encounters led him to organics. But as demand for the organics grew, so too did Bob's experiments. He discovered that through time, tested practices like cover cropping and crop rotation, he could produce successful yields without pesticides. Regenerative organic farming allowed him to grow fruits and vegetables in cold, dry Montana, providing a source of local produce to families in his hometown. He even started producing his own renewable energy. He learned that the grain he first tasted at the fair was actually a type of ancient wheat, one that was proven to lower inflammation rather than worsen it, as modern wheat does. That is an excerpt from the back of the book cover of a book I just recently wrapped up called Grain for Grain by Bob Quinn. In an age of record high inputs and low commodity prices, most growers I talk to are either fed up with this system or starting to grow resentment towards large ag businesses. If we look at the graphs, we are facing one of the worst input price versus commodity price skews in a long time. It is a problem, but it's not a new one, so that's what we're going to talk about. We can't complain if we're not going to change. Today's book I'm going to talk to you about is about a man who chose to change instead of complain. So, this book is a book that I recently read slash listened to just while in the midst of harvest. I was working, we were traveling around the country, and I think there's a lot this book has to offer in terms of creative problem. And I think this book has a lot to offer in terms of creative farming and problem solving, which are two things I feel like our industry desperately needs. So that's what we're going to cover today. This is episode 002 of Ag Outliers. Outlier, as defined by the Cambridge Dictionary, is a fact, figure, piece of data, etc., that is very different from all the others in a set and does not seem to fit the same pattern. This podcast is dedicated to the people in agriculture that fit that description. So, if you're someone who considers yourself outside the mold, if you're considering yourself someone who doesn't want to follow the status quo and doesn't want to be lumped in with everyone else, specifically within the agriculture industry, that's you. This podcast is for you. You are an outlier. So welcome to the Outliers podcast. This episode specifically is heavily inspired by the Founders podcast by David Senra. If you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend you go check it out. Basically, he covers biographies of exceptional entrepreneurs and business people throughout history and tries to pull out concepts that can be applied to our lives and our business. And it's something that has benefited me greatly in my business and in my life. And it's something that I just love to put on while I'm driving or operating equipment or just even sitting and doing some more tedious tasks. I just really love to kind of soak up the lessons that can be learned from exceptional people or good stories. And I think the agriculture industry has a lot of really cool people and a lot of really cool stories to share, even if we don't agree with all these people all the time. You probably even noticed while I was reading the back of this cover, there's probably some things, when you hear the word organic or regenerative, the hair on your arm kind of starts to stand up and you're like, I don't know about this. I don't know about this, but hear me out. I think there's a lot still to be gleaned from this book. And I think there's a lot to be gleaned from just people who buck trends or try to do something differently. And so that's what I'm going to try to do today. This is not a summary of the book, grain by grain, but it is something that I will say is trying to pull concepts from and trying to illustrate, hey, this is what Bob did to set his operation apart, that anyone, no matter how you farm, can pull concepts from and apply to your operation or your business, whatever that may be. So, with that said, this is not a substitute for actually reading the book. Highly recommend reading the book. If you have Spotify, you can actually listen to the audiobook for free, but I'd highly recommend purchasing the book. I'll have a link to it in the description of this podcast, and you can find it on Amazon or Audible or wherever you find books. Once again, this is not a substitute for buying and reading the book. I'd highly recommend doing that, but this is something that hopefully will offer value to you. So let's jump into it. So first off, Bob farms in Big Sandy, Montana, which is kind of the middle of nowhere. It's probably about an hour away from any sort of quote unquote city by Montana standards, I believe it's like an hour and a half from Great Falls. I used to live up in Montana, and so an hour and a half is relatively close by Montana standards, but still, it takes a bit to get somewhere. Um, but that matters though, because early on in the book, Bob ends up going to college first in Bozeman at MSU, and then later goes on to UC Davis for his PhD. Bob specifically got out of the environment he was in. Um, and goes to learn things somewhere else. Which I know it's kind of a cliche for the farm kid to leave the farm and go to a big city or go somewhere else and to learn a bunch of things and then come back to make a bunch of big changes on the operation. But I don't want you to miss this. New ideas are not inherently bad, and going away to learn new ideas, I think, is actually a really great concept for anyone wanting to improve or grow. You do not learn things by doing things the exact same way over and over again and staying within your bubble. Um, every exceptional person I've met, every exceptional grower I've met, is either heavily involved in peer groups, attends lots of conferences, or is constantly reading or listening to things to increase their knowledge of the realm of agriculture they're in or their business, whatever that may be. Taking those outside sources and bringing them into your operation, I think, are so important. That's how I try to run my business: is what can I take from what other people are doing and apply that to mine, but always with the caveat of, hey, I got to tweak this to make sure this works here, instead of just carbon copying whatever someone else is doing. So um, that would be kind of concept point five. I won't say it's concept one to pull from this, but basically, Bob goes away to learn some things. He gets out of his state. He goes to different places, which is not a new thing, but I think it's one of those things. It's, if you are considering gaining knowledge, go somewhere that is not your home environment. Go somewhere that is not your bubble. Get out of your comfort zone. The same thing applies to politics. It's really good for you to learn from people you disagree with. And that's why I think it's really important to cover books like this, because yes, Bob is a regenerative grower, he's an organic grower, and know most of my audience from social media leans way more towards the quote unquote industrial or production side of agriculture. They're not mutually exclusive. One side is not more right than the other. One side is not more wrong than the other. There's a lot of nuance that happens there. Once again, keep listening, keep understanding that there's things to be learned here. So, on to concept number one. New income sources are always something to be considered. Here's a quote from one of the early on chapters. I told my cousin I had a different idea. How about finding me some California customers for my wheat? This was my first notion about how I could add some value back to my family's farm production by sidestepping the large scale grain handling and milling industry and selling premium quality whole grain directly to bakers. So, Bob basically goes to college. He does some things. I believe he works in the medicine industry for a few years. He does some chemical analysis for courtrooms and things like that. Does a couple different business ventures, but eventually works his way back to the farm. And one of his first ideas when he comes back to the farm is saying, hey, how can I bring some value back to his family farm? He's starting to see the changes in the industry. He's starting to see changes in a small town. He's seeing more and more growers go out of business. He's seeing the small businesses in town start to close. He starts to see rural America start to hurt, and kind of seeing the consolidation of the agriculture industry. This would have been, I believe this probably was in the 70s and the 80s. So this is early on. I mean, Bob's been at this for a while, but he's starting to see the big changes that we all, in 2025, we're seeing, 40 years later of mass consolidation. Farmers have gotten bigger. We all know rural America is hurting bad. Most small towns are starting to fall apart. I mean, drive through any main street, in a small town, and half the businesses are closed. If you're lucky, they all still have windows and they haven't been broken into or boarded up yet. But Bob early on sees, hey, I can't just compete on the commodity market. I need to figure out how to bring value back to his farm specifically. He's not just trying to grow a commodity. He's trying to find something, maybe niche or a direct contract that he can bring to his operation to increase revenue. Once again, that's something that all the best operations I've been on have done, is they either are masters of scale or they're masters of selling to the right people. And so Bob goes out of his way to do this. Once again, this is something I see time and time again. There are people who go out of their way to find these direct contracts or to be able to supply, maybe not direct to consumer, but direct to a business and sidestepping, kind of like Bob's saying, sidestepping the large scale grain handling and milling industry and selling premium quality whole grain directly to bakers. That's what he's doing here. He's skipping the middleman to bring that dollar that would the middleman would have gotten back to his operation. So that's concept number one. So he ends up doing this for a few years. He keeps continuing to find contracts like that. He starts to work with other growers to bring contracts to them, but he's starting to be a source for this quality grain to people in California and I believe a couple different other states. And he starts to get more requests for organic. He starts to hear talk of it. He starts to hear of the premiums, things like this. And this is back in the 80s when organic was still very not formalized yet. We'll get into that a little bit later, but Bob sat on the team that helped define the organic standards for the USDA. So this is way pre-organic compared to what we have today. And so he is still dabbling with it, kind of runs into a few people that kind of I don't know if turn him on to it, but he thinks enough about it to give it a shot, not just as a like not a hippy dippy green thing, but just as a hey, this is a value add for my operation as well. This is something that, if customers are demanding this, it's something maybe he could meet the demand for. And so once again, this is Montana in the 80s. There's only a handful of organic growers out there. He's learning from them. He's running into these people. And in the fall of 1986, he begins to kind of jump into his first test with organic. So let me read this quote for you. In the fall of 1986, I launched my first experiment with organic. I prepared 22 I prepared two 22-acre fields for winter wheat planting, side by side. The first field would be chemical free. I've been growing alfalfa hay there for the past few years, so I hadn't been spraying it with herbicide. And since alfalfa is a legume, I had plowed it into the soil in place of synthetic fertilizer. I took a soil test to measure how much nitrogen I got from the alfalfa and found that was pretty high, 95 pounds per acre. The second field was my control. To be sure it was an apples to apples comparison, we took soil tests to see how much nitrogen was present. Since we hadn't planted legumes there for some times, we weren't surprised to find that the nitrogen content was significantly lower than in the field that had been planted with alfalfa. But we didn't want to give the organic experiment an unfair advantage. So we added enough synthetic fertilizer to the control plot to make sure both fields had an equivalent start of 95 pounds per acre. The only difference between the two fields was the row spacing of the seeds. In the control field, I planted the rows of wheat seeds 14 inches apart, as we normally did. But in the organic field, I planted them closer together, just 7 inches apart. I had been told that getting quick canopy cover, smothering out any unwanted plants with a consistent stand of crops that captured all the sunlight, was more important to preventing weed problems in organic systems. So, in essence, I use the narrower row spacing to substitute for the herbicide that we use in the control field. Okay, so here's concept number two. Try new things and validate them. You don't have to, there's a lot of organic and regenerative guys out there who will tell you you need to switch everything, you need to swap it all over. The most sane regenerative farmers I've ever met will all tell you, I don't care if, you switch to regenerative. I don't want to bankrupt you. You know, if there's people trying to tell you you need to switch everything over overnight, chances are they don't have your best interests at heart. People who really do care about other growers, other farmers, and want them to switch are going to say, hey, it might not be perfectly for you. I can't bankrupt you trying to convince you to do this, but maybe give it a shot. And so that's what Bob does. He doesn't bet the whole farm on it. He takes two 22-acre fields and does a side by side trial with them. He tests them. Okay. Once again, most people do some sort of trials on their operation. And they're usually just to try and compare different products or different brands and whatever they amount to. But Bob goes and says, I'm going to do this with a couple different practices. So he does that between organic and conventional. He tries a new idea. He brings that new idea. He tries it. He doesn't bet the whole farm, but he tries it because, if he thinks there's a shot at trying it, he might as well give it a shot. So that's concept number two. Try new things and validate them. You don't have to bet the farm on something you don't know is going to work. Farming's a risky business. I'm not going to tell you to bet the farm on one thing. But you will be a fool, and hear me out, it would be foolish to not be trying new things consistently. And maybe that means organic for some people. Maybe that means regenerative. Maybe that means a different product. Maybe that means a different brand, whatever that may be. You got to be trying new things and validating them. And so that's concept number two. And there's something really cool here that Bob finds out. So I'm going to read a quote from a little farther in that chapter. The yields from the organic and the conventional fields were nearly identical, and so was the protein content. And the chemical field was weedier than the organic one. Let me read that again. The chemical field was weedier than the organic one. Narrow row spacing in our experimental plot had shaded out the kochia plants, and they had never got started. My father was astounded. He spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on fertilizer and herbicide, only to find out that he could have accomplished the same thing by strategically growing alfalfa at the right time in his crop rotation and planting his wheat seeds closer together. Okay, so the test proved itself, and it kind of blew his mind. He would have never found that out if he hadn't have tried that new things. And even his dad is astonished that, hey, this actually worked. That the guy who spent less on inputs had a better looking field and similar yields to the traditionally farmed model. Okay. As people who are fed up with inputs and the way the system is working right now, which is a lot of growers in the industry. I did a survey, a couple weeks ago for a presentation I was doing, and it was 56% on one platform and 60% on the other said that their primary concern on their operation in the coming years was input prices. It wasn't government regulation. It wasn't unstable markets. It was input prices. And Bob talks about that a lot in his book of not wanting to be controlled by the input prices and the input companies that are selling to traditional industrial farms. Okay. So a big goal of Bob's, as he mentions throughout the book, is a circular farm, basically. Growing what he needs to continue his operation. I don't have something in there about his later on going to grow his own diesel fuel, but he does eventually start working towards, hey, how can I grow the fuel for my tractors that I use for my farm? By the time you get to the end of the book, he doesn't switch entirely over to the homegrown diesel because it doesn't work as well in the winter, but he is using a portion of his farmland to grow diesel for his tractors, and not directly diesel. I mean, obviously it's a biofuel, it's a crushed biofuel. But the principle stands. He is trying to figure out, how can I keep the money that I have on the farm? Okay. Big thing here. So that is concept number two. Try new things and validate them, and you don't have to bet the farm. You can just try new things, and if it works, keep going, pursue it, keep changing, keep switching stuff over, keep trying new things. Farming is a never-ending science experiment of trying new things, and Bob just does just that. So, concept number three: just because you're crazy does not mean you are wrong. Okay. Of course, my neighbors thought I was completely crazy. They called me the weed farmer. They said organic would never work. They were just waiting to see what would happen first. Would I give up or would I go broke? I got tired of hearing this kind of stuff through the grapevine. Nobody said it to me when I was within earshot, but I didn't want to go down to the coffee shop and argue about it. So I decided to buy a brand new Caterpillar tractor. At the time, it was an expensive tractor, $60,000 or $70,000 brand new. Caterpillar was just starting to make tractors that ran on rubber tracks like a tank, and mine was the first one in the area. I could get in the field 2 or 3 days before everybody else because I was on tracks now, and I wasn't going to get stuck in the mud like you do with wheel tractors. Our farm was right on the highway, so everybody could see without saying a word. I think I got the message across. This organic farm is successful. Then the word out on the street was, okay, it looks like he can make this work, but it's because he's a PhD. It was the chemical dealers who were pushing this line, which was really quite condescending. Basically, the chemical dealers were dealing with my neighbors, and they weren't smart enough to manage their own fertility and weed control, so they better keep buying the dealers' products. Okay. Once again, a common theme that I find in my travels across the country is that uh, some of the best growers and some of the most innovative and, keyword here, profitable, are often called crazy by their neighbors. Even there's a guy I know in Iowa who does some relay cropping, and we'll sit down and talk with on the podcast at some point. But a lot of people in his area think he's absolutely crazy. People I know who are great farmers and I respect greatly say he is a little crazy, and that sometimes it didn't work and all these different things. But if you talk to this guy, you'll know that he has an impressive balance sheet. He doesn't operate off of debt, and he rarely has to buy inputs like fungicide or herbicide for his crops. And he's figured out how to do it. He has some phenomenal yields because he does not play by the rules that everybody else plays by. And everyone thinks he's crazy. But once again, he's someone who takes new ideas and he tries them and he validates them. Every single year, he's trying them and validating them and coming up with new ideas. It's a really cool farm. There's so many cool things that are going on. It's just crazy because everyone else thinks he's crazy. And so, once again, this concept of just because people say you are crazy doesn't mean you are wrong. Okay. And you might actually be crazy, and that's okay. That does not mean you are always wrong. Obviously, do this tactfully, things like that. But we can see here, just through Bob's example, that, hey, he's making money. And to prove it, he bought a brand new tractor for everybody to see. Because we all know that, that's how you show off your success in the farm world. You just go buy that brand new shiny tractor, and everyone says this. But then you see people keep making excuses. They say, "Oh, it's because he's got a PhD. It's because he's smart." And once again, it's either people who are probably jealous of what he's achieved, or people who have a benefit of tearing that other person down. Once again, guys, just because someone else looks crazy or your neighbor looks crazy does not mean they're wrong. And chances are, if they do look a little crazy and they keep doing it year over year, they're probably making some money doing it. Because if one thing I know about humans is they really like to make money. And if they figure out how to make money, they're going to keep doing that because it works. Very rarely does someone uh, stop choosing to make money. There are people out there, but if your operation is successful and you may look a little crazy doing it, but you keep doing it, chances are you're probably onto something. So I could give a myriad of examples of other growers I've met who have been called crazy, or people in their community think they're crazy, but they just keep doing it. So on to the next concept. Like many farming communities in the United States, Big Sandy suffers from an ironic dearth of healthy food, fresh food. Since nearly all our farmland grows commodity grain that gets shipped out, most of the food we eat has to get shipped in. Shipping food in is expensive in both economic and environmental terms, but we have come to rely on these imports of the standard American groceries. Wintertime tomatoes, bananas, avocados, most of which are sourced from areas with longer growing seasons and more water, from either the sky or irrigation. It's not a very sustainable system, and it leaves very much of our region hungry. We are not alone. A recent analysis of the 314 most food insecure counties in the United States found that over three-quarters of them are rural. Child hunger in America is even more concentrated in the countryside. When the same researchers looked specifically at the counties at the highest levels of food insecurity among children, they found that 86% of these are classified as rural. I wanted Big Sandy to be able to grow the fruits and vegetables that our kids were lacking. But like most things in my career, my retirement project didn't start with a grand plan. Just like my foray into organic grain, it began with a simple experiment. I was looking for something to do with the saline seep on my farm. These seeps are pockets of salty groundwater, which eventually destroy your ability to grow crops. As saline water builds up over time, the water comes to the surface and then evaporates, leaving behind the white salt crystals. It's a problem that skyrocketed in recent years as irrigation and bare-fouled land have combined to create more of these salty pools. During the 1970s, Montanans reported nearly a fourfold increase in cropland destroyed by seeps, from 51,000 acres to 200,000 acres. Over the years, I learned that planting alfalfa or surrounding the saline areas can help dry up the seeps. Drawing water away from the salty solution breaks above the surface ground. This stops salt from accumulating on the land, giving rain a chance to wash that already accumulated salt back through the soil. Eventually, the salinity in the seep area gets back to normal so you can grow plants there again. But it's a long process, 5 to 10 years. This is yet another reason why it's a good idea to plant cover crops. They can catch the excess moisture and utilize it so you never get to the seep stage of things. So I thought, why don't I try growing something there that needs more water, like vegetables? In the spring of 2007, I planted vegetables straight across the seep to find out where they'd be most successful. I saw it as a Goldilocks problem. In the center, it would be too salty. On the far edge, it would be too dry. But somewhere in between might be just right. I planted the vegetables that I thought might grow successfully without irrigation: potatoes, onions, squash. As I was taught in college, every good experiment needs a control. So I planted a bunch of these same vegetables a quarter mile away from the seep, out in the middle of a dry field. But the real story of the experiment was the control. The vegetables that I had planted out in the middle of my dry field did much better than any of the ones in the trial plots. They looked almost as good as the plants in my garden. I was amazed to think I could grow vegetables without irrigation on 13 inches of annual precipitation. I shouldn't have been shocked, though, because of the homesteaders grew vegetables without irrigation. My grandparents had a little garden out back where my grain bins are now, which had certainly not been irrigated. The experiment station nearby in Havard had maintained a trial plot of dryland potatoes up through the time I came back to the farm, which I recalled seeing on a field site visit there. Once again, I began jogging my memory and studying dryland vegetables. I learned that many people have been doing this successfully for centuries in areas with astonishingly little water. So something we'll see later on in the book is that Bob cares about his community. Bob creates multiple jobs later on through the businesses he runs, the operations he runs, and he wants to help solve problems in his community. Which, as someone who loves to solve problems, huge fan of that. Absolutely love solving problems, but he sees the problem of rural communities not having quality food for their people to eat. And so he says, well, let me give it a shot and I'll try to grow some food for my community on my farm. And once again, he tries something new. He says, let me try to use, goes back to this circular farm idea of, hey, can I grow more on my operation without having to bring extra things in? He says, let me use this, salt seep that is on my farm ground to see if it'll grow anything useful to sell in town or to provide for our community. And he learns through his trial that, oh my gosh, hey, actually, just the regular dryland stuff performs great. It performs as good as an irrigated garden. Like it's absolutely amazing. I lived in Montana for many years, and it was just you just live under the assumption that it's too dry to grow certain things there. You get to the middle of July and everything turns brown and it catches on fire. So thinking you could grow produce crops there at all is kind of a crazy notion. So what I don't want you guys to miss here is the reason he did this in the first place was he wanted to support his community. Um, and I think that is really an underlying thing that our consolidation and our industry trends have done is that our rural towns are hurting pretty bad. And we need more jobs in our communities, specifically rural communities. I, once again, drive around a lot. I see a lot of small towns. A lot of them are decaying. It is very rare I see a thriving small town, because, frankly, the economy has dried up because of consolidation, because a lot of the money flows out of the communities into larger businesses. These communities are suffering because there's a lack of jobs. All it takes is a nationwide co-op pulling a location in a small town for that town to lose anywhere from 5 to 20 to 30 jobs. When a big co-op or input supplier or whatever company may be pulls out an area, it can have devastating effects on a community. Um, and when we cede so much power in our industry to large businesses, it gives them that power over rural America and it hurts people. We have to be honest about that. It does hurt people. And so Bob here sees that problem. He sees the consolidation. He sees the lack of quality food. And he says, I want to help solve that problem. And so he goes out of his way to quote unquote, he's in his retirement. He sold one of his businesses. He's trying to relax a little more. And he obviously, any good farmer is always trying something new. And farmers can't quit farming. That's the best part about farming is you're gonna do it till the day you die. And some people hate it, some people love it. Whole nother story for another day. But I think it's really cool that Bob's takes an interest in providing for his community. And I think that's just something we can all learn from. Not only is that a good benefit to your business, is being able to provide jobs for other people and possibly generate more income, you know, not selfishly for yourself, but generate income for yourself by also creating jobs and providing for community. People got to eat. They're going to spend their food dollars somewhere. Wouldn't it be cool if it stayed in the community? But he takes that opportunity and he says, I want to do something about that. So he's not only investing in his community, providing jobs, uh, creating a good reputation for himself as someone, hey, who's like, hey, I'm invested here. I'm not just some hippy dippy farmer trying to tell you to grow organics. Like, no, I care about our towns. And so that's what I want you guys to hear from this podcast. And I want you guys to read the book is, hey, yeah, there might be things that if you're a conventional grower, you might disagree with, but there's a lot of concepts here that you can pull from that I think would be good for you and your community. We need to be listening to people like this who have created these jobs, who've created opportunities, who are revitalizing their small towns. Those are things our industry needs. We don't want one giant mega farm through mass consolidation in 100 years. And that's the trend our industry is going towards. How can we bring jobs back to rural communities? How do we bring people back into our industry? So that's concept number 4. So on to concept number 5. Let me just read this for you. The multinational corporations that have been hoarding all the profits from our food system have used their large coffers to exercise tremendous influence over policymakers and researchers. At the same time, they've tried to win over public opinion with information campaigns designed to convince us that their products are safe, that abandoning them is dangerous, and that we need their expensive proprietary biotech to feed the world. I don't buy it. The value in our food system belongs to all of us. It's time to take it back. I think it's one of those things that we don't like to talk about in our industry, but Bob's right here. Our food system, especially in America, has a lot of control that is not at the farm level. We all know it. We don't talk about it as much as we should. I've been called an idiot online multiple times for my hot takes on this, but um, lobbyists and companies and politicians have a lot of control in our industry. Pretty much all the control. We've seen it every time Trump tweets, something in our industry changes. And it's one of those things, it's like, guys, like we have so little control of our food system. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of people who have a lot more power than we do. And we're told that without these companies and without their technology and without all these things, the industry can't exist. Oh, we need that. We need that. And it's one of those things. I just don't believe it. I probably sound a little hippy dippy saying this, but we all believe this. We all know this. And Bob is one of the few people who sees that and says, I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to change the way my operation works. And you know what? He has grown a successful operation by doing things different. Okay. He rejected the status quo. So I want you guys to hear that. Reject the status quo. You do not have to do what everyone else does. You do not have to buy in to whatever news publication that is bought out says. Okay. I'm going to break something to you guys. Pretty much every major ag news publication in our industry, they are primarily funded through advertising from large corporations. I will not mention all those corporations' names here because I don't want to muddy the waters too much, but go onto any news publication specifically targeted agriculture and look at their ads on the website. Look at what companies are paying for advertising there, and then look at what articles are written about those companies. Typically, they're going to err on the gentle and kind side. I've been told by people in the journalism industry that there are companies that they could never say bad things about because if they pulled their advertising dollars, they'd be done. Okay. That's a problem. And we all know it. We all know it's how it works and it's kind of frustrating, but we got to talk about stuff like this. And I'm willing to talk about stuff like this because I don't care if people are mad at me and disagree with me, but our industry needs to reject that the way things are the way it has to be. If you are sick of paying for inputs, if you are sick of expensive machinery, it is your duty as someone who is frustrated with those things to try to solve that problem. Don't complain and point fingers and say the government needs to do this and this person needs to do this. Be like Bob Quinn and solve your problems. Find a different way to do things. Okay. Figure out how to start operating without a line of credit. You don't like the debt that your operation has. How do you get out of that? Okay. Once again, I've met several quote unquote crazy farmers that farm with zero debt. Okay. They might have some land notes, but they don't have an operating note. If they have an operating note, it's just to buy some stuff so they can just pay off cash later. Okay. There are people who farm differently and they make it work. So to write them off and say that they're crazy and that it'll never work for you, I think is foolish. We need to listen to these people for the sake of our industry. So, concept number 5, reject the status quo. You don't have to do what everyone else does. So, um, I'm going to kind of wrap this up here. Um, with one last little thing. So I'm gonna read this quote to you. I just want you guys to listen. Imagine I told you there's a product that could dramatically reduce the incidence of 4 of the top 7 causes of death in the United States, lift thousands of Americans out of poverty, and fight climate change, all while slowing the growth of a marine dead zone and reversing pollinator decline. If this were an app, venture capitalists would be falling all over themselves to fund it. If it were a gadget, it would be making headlines and winning awards. But the common solution to an increasing number of people that are now proposing as a response to these problems is not a new app. It's not a gadget. Rather, it's about revaluing something we've come to take for granted. For granted, our food. There is a lot of power in our food system. And if we want the world to change, we have to be willing to look at our food as just that. I'm gonna have to pull out my notes here in a second, but there is a lot of power in food, not commodities in food. Okay. It's very easy to call what the industry does in agriculture as growing commodities. Let's remind ourselves first and foremost, farmers and ranchers' job is to provide food. The ethanol industry wants you to think that your job is also to grow fuel. And yes, that is something you can do, but food is the primary aim of farming and ranching, correct? So, are we willing to solve problems in our food system for the benefit of not just ourselves, but also humanity? Um, I think there's a tremendous amount of power in our food system. Where you spend your dollars is very important. The food you consume is very important. There is power there, and Bob has come to understand that. And we call him crazy because when you believe something so passionately, all you want to do is tell the world about it. If you're Bob and you found that organic farming and regenerative practices and bucking the big systems has improved your life and your operation significantly, why wouldn't you tell people about that? Why wouldn't you say, "Hey, you guys all over there are a little crazy for trying this. Like, look over here, look what I'm doing." I mean, have you ever had the best burger ever? Imagine like the best cheeseburger you've ever had in your entire life. You want to tell people about it right after you eat it because it's changed your life. I love cheeseburgers, that's why I'm saying it. But any organic or regenerative grower that you meet often feels the same way about their practices. Now, I think they are often wrong in the way they handle and tackle those situations. I think they say some very mean and unhelpful things to industrial growers. Our food system is primarily fed by industrial agriculture. Guys, it is a part of our food system. We are not going to get rid of it. Okay. I don't think anyone who does that is wrong. I think what is wrong is when we point fingers at each other and say that can't happen. We need to reject the status quo and bring value back to our food system. Why? Because growers deserve to be paid fairly for the food that they grow, right? And consumers deserve healthy food. We can all agree on that. That is not something I think anyone in our industry disagrees on. Our methods of getting there are often different. So let me pause for a second and find a quote, and I'll read that to you in a second. All right, I found the quote I was looking for. So there's a story early on in the book where Bob goes to a peach orchard and he realizes that the goal of most commodity farming is actually a race to the bottom. How do we grow food as cheap as possible and as much as possible to sell for a set price by the commodity market? He realizes that very early on. He's in a peach orchard. It all kind of clicks for him. Read the book, you'll get it. But the quote from the book starts this way. Since that day in the peach orchard in California, when I first realized that agriculture was gearing up for a race to the bottom, I have tried to add value back. I've built up healthy soils on my farm. I've brought back jobs in my rural community. I've done research on ancient grains to understand how the seeds I select impact the health of the people who eat my crop. I did all this because I believed it was the right thing to do. But I couldn't have made a living at it if it were not for the millions of eaters who demanded healthy, fair, sustainable food. It was these eaters who pulled me into organics, whole grains, and heirloom wheat varieties. By valuing quality, they created markets for farmers like me and businesses like mine. They regenerated thousands of farms and farm towns, supported local bakeries and pasta makers, and brought back forgotten seeds that may hold the key to more nutritious meals. I'll never forget one of my first interactions with such an eater. A woman who walked up to my booth at a trade show in the early 1990s and said, "Thank you," looking me straight in the eye and shaking my hand heartily for growing food for my family. Thank you? That is something I'd never heard as a commodity wheat farmer, and it forever changed the way I saw my farm. From then on, I no longer grew commodities. I only grew food, good food. That quote right there really caused me to stop and ponder and ask, is our industry's job to grow commodities, or is it our industry's job to grow food? I'm going to tend towards the food side. When we view our food as a commodity, we tend to devalue it. Um, Commodity farming is inherently a race to the bottom. When that's the point of a commodity. In my business, if I am a media company and there's 100 other media companies, we're all probably going to end up to the point where either we have to find our own niche market and add value back into what we do through extra little things or value adds, or if we have the exact same services as every other media company, we can only compete on price. Okay, and that's a race to the bottom. And it just ends up with everyone barely making any money to survive. And the only way to achieve profitability is through efficiency at scale. Um, and that's happening in the media industry. And it's definitely not nearly as hard as farming is. But we have to be honest, when you're growing a commodity, it is a race to the bottom. So hoping policy affects commodities to go up, it's a never ending battle. And I think if you're growing commodities, the person who's going to win is always the person who is buying. The person who's selling rarely has the upper hand in a commodity market. Um, so when we shift to you grow food, you don't grow a commodity, I think it totally shifts the paradigm of how we look at our industry. I view the agriculture industry as one that you are growing a quality product that people have the right to buy and consume. And whatever you can do to add value back into that or provide a better or healthier product, you can add value back to your bottom line through charging more. I think that's why I think direct to consumer models are so cool. That's why I think farming differently or focusing on protein content or whatever that may be, there is value to be added back in there in the aspect of food. So, guys, highly recommend picking up the book. Bob has inspired me to probably try even wheat farming myself. I'm working on trying to get a few acres myself to just experiment around, maybe lose a few dollars. Even in Iowa, I think there's opportunities for ancient wheat and things like that. That's a whole huge part of the book that I didn't even really talk about. He is a great example of someone who just took a concept, practice it, kind of experiment around with it, and then took it worldwide. His whole brand of wheat and the way that that operation has changed and functioned for him is super cool. Guys, pick up the book, give it a read, give it a listen, whatever it may be. Super big fan. I'm going to try to get Bob on the podcast at some point just to hear his story and kind of dig in a little deeper. But guys, there is crazy people in our industry who have figured something out. And as long as we look at them as the crazy people over there, there's a lot we're not learning. So pick up a book, listen to podcasts from people you disagree with, and don't listen for what you disagree with them on. Listen to what you agree with them on. Okay. If you are a grower or you're a producer and you're frustrated with large companies controlling how the industry works, or you're frustrated with the high input prices that your operation sustains, and you're frustrated with the low commodity prices, guys, the reason Bob did what he did was because he felt all those same things. Okay. So if he felt all those same things and he made a change, why can't you? So if you are an agriculture outlier, you're someone who wants to push the boundaries on your operation, this book is worth a read. If you enjoyed this podcast, if it was a good resource for you, please share and give it a review. I genuinely want this podcast to be the most valuable resource the agriculture industry has in forms of podcast form. That was a mouthful, but yeah, this podcast, I want to have a lot of value for whoever listens to it. So if you enjoyed it, at the very least, leave it a review, give it a share. I'll see you guys next week.